Hi, everybody. Bo Rohde from the Houston, Texas office, and I'm here today to go over some of the new enhancements through a few parts here on the Opti Rough and some of the new features and functionalities inside of there. So we'll get started with this part. We have a simple part. There is an extreme amount of material above the top of this part, but it just kind of helps it show better. This would be kind of what you would see before on any Opti Rough without having to go set your minimum depth and whatnot on your steep and shallow. So let's dive into our parameters. And I'm going to go ahead and just start at probably one of the things that I'm kind of most excited about with Opti Rough is we now have the option for collision checking. So that's one of the new features, and I'm just going to kind of work down the list, just kind of point out a few things, and we'll go over them a little more in detail and further on other demos. So next thing I'll do is I'll go to my stock, and notice we still have the rest material, but we also, when we turn that on now, we're going to have the option to detect undercut stock. This feature is new in Opti Rough and Area Rough as well. And I'll explain that in a little more in depth in another part. Cut parameters. This top part, no difference. One thing you will notice that the micro lift has now moved. It's now down in the linking parameters, which we'll take a look at here in just a minute. And then we'll go to our steep and shallow. So steep and shallow, we still have our Z depths, minimum depth. And if you'll notice, I'll go ahead and just turn these on for now. If we look in here, we used to have to go into our minimum Z depth and we could right click and go down to Z coordinate of a point. Now we don't have to do that. We can just hit the little white arrow and we can go pick the point that we want. Or we can just say detect limits. Either way is going to get you there. We have automatically detect depth. I'll get it out in a minute. Which is just going to look at the top of your stock, see where it's at. We have include stock, which is going to allow us to use our stock and relay that back to the amount of depth cut that we need, and you'll see that momentarily. We have the same thing down on maximum depth. I'll turn that off, and you can see, depending on the selection you make, depends on what becomes available to you. And you have the same thing over here to the right as we did in the Z depth. So if I say detect depth, you'll see that it changed just minutely from whatever I was doing with this file before. So I'm going to turn this off and go to my linking parameters now. And you'll notice for you guys that haven't been using multi-axis very long or just started, 2022 was an entrance into a new linking parameter page. So your micro lift now has moved for your transitions here, has moved over into the linking parameters page. So just be aware of that. Don't freak out when you don't see it. And then come on over. You have a little bit better selection or more options, let's say, of on your leads and as far as your primary lead, secondary lead, when dealing with Opti Rough now and your Area Rough as well. So I'm going to jump out of here real quick. That's kind of just an overview of everything that's there. And we want to address being able to take off all of this material from top to bottom. So with using inside of my parameters, I'm going to go to my holder first thing, and I'm going to say collision checking. And you notice I got 50 thou on my holder. And then I'm going to go to my steep and shallow, and I'm just going to turn on my minimum depth and say include stock. And if you don't know this, or this is kind of new, I guess in 2023, it is new. We used to do a preview chain. It used to be up here on the top of the window here, we just need to make sure that generate toolpaths on, and we can say apply. And what this does is it allows us to regenerate this part without getting out of this dialog window. So we don't have to green check, wait on it to regenerate, and then go back and open the parameters back up. If everything looks the way we expect, then we can green check and we're out, we're done. If not, we can come back in and make a change. So now that this is regenerated, you'll see that we are now cutting from the top of the stock all the way down the part in respect to the depth cuts that we have set in our cut parameters. So I've told my step down here to be a 1/2 inch, so it's taking 1/2 inch steps down till it gets to the bottom of the part. So pretty neat thing that's coming about, and I only see it evolving better from here. I'm going to go ahead and green check to this, and I'm going to go down to this third operation, and we're going to investigate this one a little bit. Now this kind of goes along with the collision checking on the holder. Now I've created another tool here, and I've actually created the tool a little bit shorter than the previous tool. Same tool, just copied it. But what I want to kind of show here is same functionality, but now if you look around on the back side of this part, you can see that we're not machining anything here. And that's because it's detecting the collision between the holder and the part itself. So with that being turned on, it's looking at that holder and it's saying, hey, I can't reach back down that far because I'll have a collision. This one I have actual rest material turned on, and now that you see that turned on, you can see the detect undercut stock is now active to where I could select that. This part doesn't have a good example of that. I'll cover it again in another demo. On our steep shallow, notice I have now both my min and my max depth are set to include stock. And if you look, my maximum depth now is -8 inches, which is the total length of my stock that I had set up. Now, if I want to change that, I can just select automatically detect stock or automatically detect depth. I'm having trouble with those two today. And if I go ahead and say apply to this, the result should be that we cut from the top all the way down to just the bottom of the part. Give this a minute to regenerate here. You notice it's grayed out, so it's not looking at that depth at all. And we got exactly what we were thinking, right down to the bottom of our part. Talk about one of the newer features inside of OptiRough for detect undercuts. So common problem that you have when you're doing an OptiRough or an OptiRest mill, something of that nature, on a part like this, we have the toolpaths want to go through these holes from the other side. So if I look at my stock model, I've already got my underside cut. And then if I go and turn on the toolpath for this, you can see that we have these unnecessary cuts all the way down through the part. So with the new OptiRough feature, detect undercuts, we can turn that feature on, and we don't have to go in there like used to. We would have to say maybe skip pockets. We could skip all these pockets in here, but we're still going to have material left in there. We're going to have to go in there and address it at some point. So inside of our dynamic OptiRough, my parameters up here, and just going back, I've got my holder. Again, we've got the new collision checking that we could turn on if we needed to, but we don't on this one. We have our rest material reference back to our one piece of stock. And then for right underneath that, we have our detect undercuts. So that's all the material that's already been removed. So I'm just going to turn on detect undercuts, I have my cut parameters set, my step over, so on and so forth, and my steep shallow is set to the bottom of the part. I'm going to go ahead and just green check to this and let this regenerate, and this one takes just a minute to regenerate. It's a small tool, a lot of step overs. But what we're going to see is the tool is going to go just far enough to be able to get all this material out of the bottom of all those little windows without a lot of excessive cut time. Really excited about some of the new features inside of OptiRough. They've really cleaned it up. A lot of new options on your lead in and lead out, a lot more control. We'll show that in just a minute on how this, on another demo on how that all comes into play. And it looks like we're about done. So if we look at this toolpath now, everything appears to be normal. But when we flip this over, notice that the toolpath is just going below this bottom surface. So there's no excess cuts necessarily that don't need to be made. If I turn on my stock model, it kind of shows a little better. You can see where that toolpath is actually getting below where those pockets are, and it's making sure it's getting all that material out of there as needed. So really cool feature. Just a simple click of the button. Don't have to go back in and try to fill up these windows with a surface to try to get it to avoid it, or go back in with another tool and rough this out before you go in with your finish tool. You can take care of it all right here inside of a single toolpath. With this part here, we're going to kind of just go over some of the stuff that we've already kind of looked at in OptiRough previous to this, and kind of look at how the detect undercuts is going to avoid some of the toolpaths that we have in this, or some of the unnecessary toolpaths that we have in this OptiRough. So if we take a look at this first instance of this, is kind of how you would have seen a part in previous versions of Mastercam come in with the OptiRough. And if we kind of zoom in here to the middle, it's kind of hard to see, but you can see here that where it goes into this hole, you have all this wasted time of that toolpath helixing into something that's already been cut. Let's see, I'm going to turn on a section view here. So if you go in, you can kind of see that helix motion there going into these two holes that have already been cut. And just to kind of jump forward, I'm going to go ahead and select the other OptiRough rest rough that I have here. And if you look at this, now you can kind of see that that tool's only cutting right where it needs to. It's not doing a whole lot of excess cutting. I'm going to go ahead and jump back to my planes and turn off my section view here. And I'm going to go back to my toolpath. And we're going to look a little more in depth in here on this OptiRough on this particular part. The biggest example here is if we look at this toolpath, we see a lot of unnecessary air cuts. If I go into my home tab and go to analyze toolpath and bring this tool over, let me go to my front view here. And if we look, it's making toolpaths all the way out here and further down. We don't need to make those necessary cuts. There's nothing out there for it to even cut. So now with our detect undercuts turned on, so I'll open up my parameters and show you here on our stock, we have, one other operation going back to our stock, and we're using detect undercuts. And what that's going to do now is eliminate that tool from going and make it unnecessary cuts for us. Now we still are, going to get our cuts down here all the way to the depth that we've selected. And it's just going to make a lot cleaner toolpath for us. Kind of going into some of what we've seen in previous releases. If we look at our toolpath control, we have our containment boundary here. This automatic used to say silhouette boundary. There are options in here to bring in a silhouette boundary, and what that's for is so that files that are being brought in from previous versions of Mastercam now will bring in that silhouette boundary, and or it will bring in your boundary chain, however you've had it selected. And then there's also a bounding rectangle, which is going to put an area around just the part itself, and a bounding circle, which if we used a bounding circle, we'll leave this the way it was, what that bounding circle kind of represents is it's going to create this full circle around your part to the outer extents of the size of your part. Could be useful, be quick, easy way for your, if you have a part that's been turned off of a lathe, for instance, and it's already desized and they turned it to the outside edges of the part. So something to look at. And again, just to kind of go over some of the new functionalities. Remember, in our cut parameters now, our minimum toolpath, our micro lift is now moved on down to in the linking parameters. So you have your micro lift here. And then we have this new page for our new look to our linking parameters for the Opti rough in our lead in and lead out. And all these, you can change all these. Just gives you a lot more control over how your tool's going in. If you remember before, you just had horizontal entry exit and a height. Now you have, the option to use same lead in, same lead out. If you uncheck it, you can do a different lead in and a separate lead out on your method, or on your secondary leads, you have the same option as well. So don't sweat it when you get into your cut parameters and you don't see your same information there. Just remember, it's moved down to the linking parameters. I think it's a nice clean look now. And then in our steep and shallows, again, this is a kind of an interesting one. If you notice, I have my maximum depth set to 5 millimeters, which is actually the bottom edge or the top edge of this chamfer down here. But with the new detect undercuts, Mastercam doesn't need to go down that far, so it's not going to get down past that area. The next thing that I would like to go over with you is looking at the same kind of part here is some of the enhancements to area rough. So inside of area rough, we have the same options that we have inside of our dynamic Opti. So toolpath control still looks the same. We have our collision checking that we can do with our holder as well. We have our cut parameters still the same. For our steep shallow, we have the same options that we had before with the Opti rough. But in our linking parameters, notice the micro lift's not used, so it's grayed out. But you still have the same look here. You still have the new lead in and lead out page that is being used in the multi-axis area. So looking at this, detecting the undercuts, notice on this one we're not getting all that as much cut in there as what we were before with, or what we would have gotten in previous versions of Mastercam. So hope that helps. The next thing that we want to look at is we're going to jump down here to our, this area rough was just to kind of clean out some material so that I could create a stock model for this next little demo here. So what we're going to be looking at is just these little orange areas in here, and this is kind of where we can kind of show off the way the new lead in lead out works. Not a horrible transition between the cuts here. You see it kind of arc down, it's going to arc up and just kind of loop around to the next toolpath as it works its way down. But we might be able to clean that up a little bit. So I'm going to just jump into my linking parameters and go down, or into my parameters and go to my linking parameters where it controls my lead in and lead out. And instead of a 90-degree sweep, I'm going to go ahead and change this to like a 120-degree sweep. Go ahead and use my apply button so I can just see my results as I stay inside of my toolpath. And once this goes into multi-thread, I'll be able to move my part around a little bit. There we go. See what our toolpath looks like. Just to give you a little bit of a... So now we're getting a nice, pretty smooth transition from one cut to the next. We're going to start here, go around, just going to come out and loop around and work its way down that wall and just kind of keep us in the cut all the way down. So adjusting your linking parameters now, to me, has gotten much easier, and I think it's something that everyone will be using, because to me it just makes a lot more sense.